Hello and welcome to That Pedal Show. Dan here.
Mick here. Hello, welcome to the show. Please subscribe.
And thanks to everyone that's gone to thatpedalshowstore.com and grabbed some merch. Mick loves it when I do this.
Excellent. Okay, so kind of a 101 question today, quite a basic question. Nevertheless causes a lot of confusion among a lot of people, especially people who are newer to playing the guitar through guitar amplifiers.
Yes. So we had a question in from Christopher Kang 5707, and his question is the volume control on the AC30 closer to the volume knob or gain knob on traditional amps? I'm very confused about this topic. In other words, if I want to crank a traditional amp that has both gain and volume knobs, do I crank the gain knob or the volume knob?
There you
And
go.
by volume knob, it's talking about a master volume.
Yeah, so everything we're going to talk about today is principally and first associated with valve guitar amplifiers. It is also applicable to transistor guitar amplifiers, and it is also applicable to digital modeling situations, which use the same terminology, but we're going to be talking about and demonstrating valve guitar amps because that's where it begins.
Indeed.
So let's define our terms then. We've used all kinds of terms there. We've used gain, we've used volume, we've used master. What do we mean?
What do we mean?
Yeah.
Right. We mean at which point in the circuit is gain introduced or controlled or limited. And depending on where you do that in the circuit of the amplifier, you'll have different results.
And
it's very interesting.
It comes from the days when back in the 50s when electric guitar amps became popular, into the 60s, amps just used to have volume. If you look at this Fender Princeton down here, look.
One volume control. How lovely.
And it's gloriously heavy since Dan put an EV speaker in it.
Yes.
I had forgotten that.
Oh man,
like
it sounds
twice
so
as heavy.
good. I'm so happy with it.
So what you'll see on that Princeton, for example, and other Marshall Plexis, the AC30 in question, all Fender Tweed amps, I'm going to say most, if not all, Fender Black Panel amps have one volume knob.
That's right.
Move forward from there and you start to see two volume knobs. Typically, one will be down this end.
Yes, near the input.
Near where your guitar plugs in. And one, typically, but not always, will be at that end.
The other end. That's right.
Why is that?
So, the one near the input is the one that controls the amount of signal generally that goes off, like post tone stack. The one at the other end is the amount of signal typically that is sent into the power stage of the amplifier.
Yeah. So if we take very, very quickly a classic Marshall, first thing is gain, a fixed gain stage.
Yeah, and that's in most amplifiers, you
Guitar
plug
goes
in and it's a fixed gain
Fixed
stage.
gain stage. What then happens is one of two things, either EQ or more gain stages. And depending on whether it's a classic Marshall or Fender, they could be either way around.
Yeah.
So you're going gain, more gain, EQ. And then after all of that comes some other stuff like a phase inverter in some amps.
Yep.
And then you get your master volume. The point is, if you want distortion in an old-fashioned amp, you had to turn the volume up to the point where it becomes unbearably loud.
Correct.
So some bright spark came up with master volume sometime in the 70s.
And the first amp to have master volume was?
Wow.
We think?
Sometimes Mesa claim it, I think, MkIII Boogie, and but it is attributed to a bunch of people. I don't know who has the patent on it, so we'll just carefully skirt around that. But Boogie was certainly early to the game.
Right.
And all of a sudden, amps started to have two controls. The preamp, so you can get it overdriving and distortion, and that might be called preamp, might be called volume, might be called gain, but it's at the beginning of the circuit. And then the master volume, which we might get into discussions about that as we go, sets your overall loudness.
Yeah.
Sounds simple, right? Set the sound you want, get the volume you want. But as we're about to discover, it's not that simple.
No, it's not simple because everything affects everything else. You can't just change the output volume and think that everything else is going to remain the same. You change the output volume, the output stage is working harder, more harmonics are introduced, the speaker is working harder. The way that the preamp then interacts with the output stage is different. And it's worth also mentioning that this is one thing that trips a lot of people up. When you plug your guitar into the amplifier, it is plugged into a gain stage of fixed address, of a fixed level. And there's quite a generous helping of gain in that stage, which is one reason why we say that the first gain stage really is the volume control on your guitar. It's absolutely true. The volume control on your guitar dictates how much signal is going into that first gain stage.
Not necessarily that first volume pop.
Exactly. And then some amplifiers have what's called a cathode follower, which changes the impedance going through, whether it's got a tone stack. Black panel amplifiers generally didn't have those. So the character of all the amplifiers, it's not just down to the pre-gain and the post-gain. There's like everything in the amplifier has an impact. And it, not to say the least, the impact on the relationship between the pre-gain and the post-gain.
Yeah, yeah. But the idea of master volumes was that you could set your tone and have it louder or quieter.
Exactly.
So for those of you who've just skipped to this part, because I will have put a timer in, welcome back.
Welcome back.
To avoid the tangent. Let's start with the AC15 then, because the original question was about an AC30.
Yeah.
Little point demonstrating that, because if you want to hear a cranked AC30, go back over shows and hear it. What we're going to assume then is our AC15 today is similar to an AC30, and what I'm going to do is turn the master volume all the way up to 10.
Beautiful.
Because that's basically what you have.
Yeah.
If your amp only has one volume control.
So if you
the
think...
master is on 10.
Exactly. If you think about the reason they're called non-master volume amplifiers is that master volume isn't there. It's taken out of the circuit. The closest we get to that in an amplifier with a master volume is turning it all the way up, so it has the least impact on the circuit. It never has no impact, but it has the least impact on the circuit as it's turned all the way up.
As you can see from iPhone cam, master all the way up to 10. Well, at least maximum. Turn the channel volume down to 0 and ask Dan to start playing. Not an unfamiliar situation for Vox users.
No. Lovely and open and chimey.
Gets quite loud quite quickly.
Yes.
If we want the amp to overdrive, forgetting the master volume is there for a second, we just have to turn it up.
What a righteous noise.
Happy face, happy face. So now the theory goes that we've got our sound, we can just turn it down.
With the master volume, okay, let's see.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, there's something about the AC15 volume control that we think is the case,
Yeah, it's very clever.
which enables it to do that.
Yeah, it's very clever. So the way that the master volume on the AC15 works is there's a thing in the amp called a phase inverter. You've got two valves in the power stage, right? And in the case of AC30s or Vox amplifiers, they're called EL84s. They're a long, thin valve. To make these work as to amplify the signal,
Just to clarify, an AC15 and an AC30 is a push-pull power stage.
it's still a Class AB.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not
Still push-pull.
Exactly.
Lots of people refer to Voxes as Class A. Still a push-pull power stage.
Yeah. Which means that half of the wave is being amplified by one valve and the other half is being amplified by the other. Now, to make that work, what we need is to split the signal and make it out of phase. Now, what the master volume does in this that's very clever is that out of phase signal that's coming out and going into the valves, so it's amplifying one side, the other. The master volume is taking that out of phase signal, and to turn the amp down, we are mixing the out of phase signal together. And what happens when you mix two out of phase signals together?
Yeah.
It cancels each other out.
Yeah.
It's a really clever way to do it. But that's one way to do it.
It's also really unusual in modern amps. So, and it's called a post-phase inverter master volume. And you will have heard that term used on all over the place. But it simply means that if we go back to our original signal chain, we've got original gain when you plug in. You've then got some more gain and some EQ in the preamp section. In this case, then you've got the phase inverter.
Yeah,
And after that, you've got the master volume.
correct.
And what that means is, to bring it back to the original question, that particular design of master volume, you're more able to get the sound of the cranked amp at lower volumes.
Yeah,
If you take the position of that master volume and put it before the phase inverter, that is the case in most modern channel switching amps, and we'll get to one of those which if 1985 or whatever counts as modern, then we'll go with it. But
start of modern.
the premise of modern channel switching amps, that tends to be the thing. So you then move the position of that master volume, and the circuit design will be different, but it's essentially before the phase inverter. And that's important. Why?
Because the phase inverter, the way that we hit the signal into the phase inverter is a really important part of the distortion that's created within the amplifier. If we have loads of gain, but we turn that down before we hit the phase inverter, we're missing out on a big part of the harmonic goodness.
Big part of the sound, because the sound of a cranked amp, just to reiterate, is the sound of that preamp section overdriving, the valves, circuitry, whatever EQ you've got in there, or in a transistor amp, the transistors, whatever's doing the amplification. How much is hitting that phase inverter stage, and then that all determines what's hitting the power tubes and the output transformer.
That's right.
And all of that together, and the speaker,
Yes.
is all contributing to the sound of the cranked amp.
Correct.
So the very premise of saying we'll get our sound and turn it down and sound like a cranked amp in the amp itself is kind of not very realistic,
Yeah,
because you lose all of that other stuff that's happening.
that's right. If you just think, it's the old adage, it's only ever as strong as the weakest link.
Yeah.
As soon as the harmonics stop being created in any part, that is then amplified down the chain, right through to the way the cabinet is vibrating. You know, it reminds me of when we had Robin's Dumble in here, and you turn that amp and you can hear the effect that the cabinet has, because
massively, yeah.
and so just that alone is enough to, to say that just getting the sound you want and turning it down, it has an impact.
Yeah. So that phase inverter position discussion notwithstanding, the next question we get into is size of amp. So the AC15, very famously 15 watts. We might want to talk about a Princeton at 12 watts or a Deluxe Reverb at 22 watts. for your given amount of available volume and headroom, you can only go so far in any of the stages before it starts to overdrive.
That's right.
So if you want loud and clean, you need to add more watts. We'll switch over to the Boogie for a second. This is a 100-watt Mesa Mark III. I've said it before, I'll say it again, possibly the most unhinged 1x12 combo ever designed. So this is a very different game, right? To get this power stage happening...
Oh, it's got to be...
Scary, scary, scary.
Yeah.
So this is the sort of... Not long after the dawn of channel switching amplifiers with more than 2 modes.
Right.
So you've got a clean sound,
Right.
a crunch sound, and an overdrive sound.
Okay.
In 1 amp. So essentially, it's not actually 3 channels, but 3 modes of operation going from increasingly overdriven. Now, the key thing about that is all that overdrive is created in the preamp.
Okay.
So in this amp, in the AC15, it is impossible to get a very, very loud, clean sound.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Right.
Watch what happens in this Boogie. So what we'll do, we'll use the same principles, right? We've got, as you'll see, on the front panel here, we've got volume control there. That's our gain control. We've also got a master volume control, but we've also got a channel master
Right.
for the lead channel.
Okay.
So now, in order to get our overdrive sound before with the Vox, we cranked the input gain
Yes.
and we cranked the output as well, and
Yeah.
that got that lovely overdrive sound. With the Boogie, if you want a clean sound, we're on the clean channel, we want the master high and the gain low.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
It's got to be 3 times louder than the AC15.
And it is so unbelievably quick.
Yeah. 200-watt speaker, so there is no speaker distortion. Absolutely massive output transformer.
Right.
That's not working at all yet. So it's literally not much gain going through.
Okay.
And the power section lifting it.
Right. Does it have a reverb?
Yeah.
It does. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So if we want to overdrive that clean section now, we turn the master volume down and we drive the front end. Yeah.
Okay. So that is all preamp.
Just the clean channel.
That sounds amazing.
Remember what we said before. So hopefully that makes the point that to get more overdrive at a lower volume, turn up the preamp gain.
Right.
The one nearest the input, turn the master volume down. To get a cleaner sound, master volume up, preamp gain down.
Yep.
The opposite. With the caveat, this is a powerful amplifier. Because if you do that in a small amp, a tweed champ, something 10 to 15 watts, no headroom, so it's never going to be loud and clean.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of the story.
It's very interesting that because it has such an huge open output, they've had to design the preamp to sound great without any distortion from the output stage.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that Dumble did. The output section is so open so that the preamp stage, like when we use a Kingsley overdrive, for example, you can plug that into a really clean power stage and you get that Dumble thing. So it's you know, I'm just there was something about the Mesa Boogie a mid-range thing, but no, there's nothing to do with Dumble, right? There's a...
No, they were contemporaries.
Okay.
They were contemporaries, and sorry, slight tangent. Mesa started off when Randall Smith and another guy whose name I always forget worked out of a guitar store. Anyway, Randy ends up modding Princeton's and putting hefty power transformers and uprating them and all of that. And that becomes this little 1x12. There's another one down there, which is at a Mark 1. And that becomes the sort of dawn of the high power 1x12 combo. It's a really important part of guitar amp history. Many people know Mesa for rectifiers, but that didn't happen until 90-ish.
Yeah, okay.
Before that, it was all these things, little tiny 112 powerful combos.
Yeah. But that's the Carlos Santana was a big part of that, right?
Yeah, man, this thing really boogies. To quote the phrase.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah, to quote the phrase. Sorry, I just had to check something on the recording thing. Right. So bear in mind before we said initial gain stage, bit of EQ, more gain stage, phase inverter. What then your modern channel switching amp does is add more gain stages.
Okay, right.
Either pre or post EQ, depending on the design of the amp. So
it's still technically a single channel, but we're just adding more gain.
Some amps have totally independent channels.
Yes. Yeah.
Some are adding gain stages.
Yeah, but this one is...
I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure whether it's a totally discrete, a separate channel or whether it's just more gain stages.
Right.
But the theory is the same.
Okay.
In the signal chain, you're just adding more gain stages, which might be another valve, for example, two sides of another valve.
Right.
So we're just sticking in more gain. We'll go to the Rhythm 2 channel to do that.
Okay.
So you'll notice we still haven't turned the master up. We're still quiet because we're, per the original question, we're essentially cranking that volume knob, the gain knob, even more and more and more because we've added more gain stages.
Right.
And then finally we go to the lead channel. So there's a third mode in this which adds even more, another gain stage, this cascading gain, like one gain stage into another gain stage into another gain stage.
But we're not touching the master.
Not yet. Except that this channel has its own master volume.
Oh, wicked. Okay. All right, great. That is fun.
We've got a bit of noise going on. So just to round out this discussion, what we now have is an additional volume control at the end of the channel.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is show you the sound of the master volume low and the channel volume high.
Okay.
And the channel volume low and the master volume high.
Okay. All right. Okay. That is outrageous.
Yeah.
Outrageous.
So a lot of very interactive controls.
One setting in the high gain was flubbier and messier, more like a fuzz. The other setting was much tighter and controlled.
I'm going to assume that was when the channel master loud and the master low was flubbier.
Yes.
And the other way around should have been tighter.
Yeah.
And that, you know, bless it, it's old, it's crackling a bit.
What a sound, though.
Oh, they're amazing amps.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's wild.
Yeah, they're properly amazing amps.
Is there an effects loop in that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was kind of, I would say, personally, it was the pinnacle. It was the pinnacle of the concept.
Right.
Obviously, Mark IV came after. I had one of those. Mark V came after. There's a Mark VII, I think, now. But for me, that was the pinnacle.
Yeah.
Anyway, don't want to get into a boogie history lesson, but that was my main amp for some years, and I just loved it.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Slightly problematic putting out 110 dB from a box that big and one EV speaker, because it does become a bit beamy.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound boxy. It sounds very big.
Oh, they sound massive. And if you stick another 112 EV underneath it, it's another world. Yeah, they're really amazing amps. But hopefully it makes the point. So back to the top of the question, how do I make my amp sound like a cranked amp? Which volume do I adjust? Well, you've got opportunities to adjust the volume here at the input stage, there at the output stage, in the middle with how much you're driving the EQ, because that will affect it as well.
Yeah.
And on some amps, particularly modern channel switching amps, you've got an additional volume on the channel itself. Where you push that volume and the relationship between them is what determines the sound of the cranked amp. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to sound like a cranked amp unless the power tubes and the output valves are working and the output transformer is working.
Yeah.
That's when we get into a conversation of attenuators. That's for another day.
Sure. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I haven't heard, certainly not heard that amp like that.
It's really, really brilliant.
Wow.
Let's go back to the AC15 for a minute and then let's now discuss, because what we're talking about is headroom. That's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And a cranked amp is a cranked amp and sounds like a cranked amp because it has run out of headroom. Whether you're talking about 100 watt plexi, in which case, good luck.
Yep.
Or if you're talking about a 15 watt AC15,
yep,
the sound of that cranked amp is all of those various components down the chain running out of headroom, saying, I am at capacity, please don't give me any more.
And sorry, just to carry on, the Mesa Boogie, there's different stages that the amp can run out of headroom. There was always headroom in the power stage of that amplifier.
It can always get louder.
Always get louder.
Yeah, to a point.
Yeah. But
certainly to a point that would get you kicked off any stage.
Yeah, by the time that runs out of headroom, it's all over.
The sound guy is literally throwing axes at you.
Right.
Yeah.
But we'll quite quickly run out of headroom in the Vox.
So here comes the problem then. We want to get our Vox to be a cranked sound, but then we want to get a solo boost.
Okay.
So if we get our Vox to the cranked sound that we know we liked,
doesn't matter what you kick on in front of it.
It won't get any louder. I mean, it might have got a dB louder, and the change in frequency you might perceive it as louder, but there's no boost.
No.
So if we do that in the Boogie, we'll try and get a sort of similar level of crunch. So maybe we're a clean channel pushed or rhythm channel 2. Let's see. More of an uplift.
Yep.
Because there's more available headroom in the power section, but still not a huge uplift.
No, because it's still limiting at the place where the amp is limiting.
So if we go back to the clean channel, we were on rhythm 2. I'm just going back to the clean channel. Now,
Righteous.
mental, isn't it?
Righteous.
Yeah. So,
oh man, what a sound.
they're astonishing things. They're astonishing things. That's just to say, I've got my cranked amp sound and I love it. How do I boost it? You can't.
Yeah.
Unless you've got some external device, maybe you've got a pedal in the effects loop. But even then, if the power stage is, and a traditional amp won't have an effects loop, if the power stage is going, everything's overdriving, there's nothing you can do to make it louder other than cut a load of bass and push mid frequency, which is a different discussion. But I hope that serves as a good demonstration of why, in that time, as bands started to get louder, most of us started to choose cleaner amps with pedals to get the headroom, so you could have a loud clean sound and a loud distorted sound, or you might do it within the amp itself with multiple channels.
Sure.
Rather than having this thing that's
just cranked and doing the same thing.
No chance. I mean, certainly at the kind of volume I used to play at, there's absolutely no chance in hell of a clean sound out of that.
Sure.
At the band volume.
And what's really interesting with the pedal thing, like with that amplifier, when the pedals kicked on, I didn't feel like I was missing out. You know, because it's working in relation with the amplifier.
Yeah.
The amp still has its core tone and the pedals are juicing that.
It's so important that, because I don't know about you guys and I don't know about you, Dan, the sound of the AC-15 cranked was glorious.
Amazing.
Trying to approximate that with a mid-gain sound in the Boogie, bit flat.
Yeah.
Didn't love it, actually, because most of that gain is being created in the preamp section. The power section's not really working. The output transformer's not really working. So it's not...
It's just preamp.
It's just a bit anodyne.
Yeah, right.
And then when you juice it with a pedal, I think exactly what you just said, everything starts to work a bit better. And that's the trade-off we all had to make, going from beautiful, smaller wattage cranked amps to these high power things that were just a bit more sterile.
Right.
If you use the clean.
Right.
And I guess that's the fight we've been having.
Yeah.
And it might even come back to the tenor of the original question, which is, how do I get the sound of a cranked amp? Which knobs do I twist? There's one more thing, that Dan quite rightly mentioned is important to this whole debate with cranked amps, where you push it where effects sit. If you've got an older amp that doesn't have an effects loop, you've got no choice.
It has to go in the front.
For your delay to be in the front. I don't know if the AC15 has an effects loop.
It doesn't, actually.
Does it not?
No,
Wow.
it doesn't.
There we go then. This is actually a real life example. So we'll crank the AC15 and then add some delay, yeah?
Yeah, so let's start off clean and I'll get a nice delay sound with the clean.
Yeah, I'll get as clean as we can.
Now there's a lot of delay there.
Lovely.
But I can still hear my attack from the original note. I can play with that very easily. It's beautiful. It's just so funny going to that after hearing the clean sound of that. It feels like I've been, just malnutritioned waif of a thing. Man alive.
So now we'll turn up the gain on the AC15.
Yep.
And just hear what happens to the sound of the delay.
Okay.
Don't change anything.
It's louder than the original note.
Don't change anything. Back to the boogie. One by 12.
Unbelievable.
Monster, innit?
I'm so pleased I got to hear that.
It's all part of the same discussion. When we were talking about cranked amps, we were saying something near the input where your guitar goes in, increase.
Yeah.
Doing the same thing with pedals. We're just adding gain stages and EQ and amplitude to that signal before the master volume.
Yep.
In a cranked amp, a cranked small amp, you're just hitting a brick wall.
It's got nowhere to go.
Yeah, it's already full. There's nothing you can do. When you've got headroom in the amp, there's room downstream for it to go. And just explain what you heard from the delay there.
It was wild. Into the AC30, it seemed louder than the original signal.
Yeah.
It's wild. And so, there was just nothing that you could do. You could hit it and do maybe something rhythmical, but having just a lovely wash of delay. Like in the Mesa, when you added the pedals before the delay, it was just said it had so much room. You know, at no point did it feel like it was going to get messy, or the delay feel like it's going to get messy, or amazing.
And that, you know, as is relevant to this discussion, is about gain staging. If you put the delay after overdrive, you're going to get a cleaner presentation of the delay, or at least less scrappy, shall we say. And in this case, we had overdrive, delay, clean amp. When we went into the Vox, we had delay, overdrive.
That's right. Yeah.
Overdriving amp.
Yeah.
And that's just by switching the order like that.
Yeah.
And that's another issue that you've got to get over with. It's why effects loops were invented. So
yes.
In the same way, imagine this is not the Noble's ODR1, it's your amp's preamp.
Yeah.
Where is the delay after it?
That's right.
And that's what would happen if you're using the overdrive channel in the Mesa or in your whatever multi-channel amp you have. That's why you might want to put the delay in the loop, because it comes after overdrive. Not an option.
Yeah, that's right.
In a Champ or a Princeton or a most 4 input Marshalls for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And thus we have, you know, attenuation devices with effects loops and things like that. So, you know, but that's a conversation for another day.
It is. Maybe we'll have a look at attenuators, because some of the problems that we've, or at least some of the questions that have come up today are answered by attenuators. But I thought that was illuminating.
Mate, I loved that. I love that. I mean, I've always liked the AC-15. I'm a big Vox fan, as you know, but far out. That thing is off the charts.
Yeah. I want to say thanks to my friend Simon, who's a drummer in one of the bands I play in, whose father owned that amp. An old friend of ours, David Miles, it used to belong to Robbie McIntosh before that, and it belonged to Chrissy Hind before that, which is pretty cool. And it's just spending some time with us. So thank you, Simon and Sadie, for letting us be custodians of it for a minute.
Amazing.
And it's a great trip down memory lane for me to hear it too.
We'll have to get Robbie to come in and have Schwang on it.
We have talked about it. So I hope that answers your question. Volume gain, preamp versus master. How do they work? Hopefully that explains it. In big amps with loads of headroom and loads of power, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
In small amps with not much, it's much, much more complex, much more interactive.
Yep.
Good.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And a massive thank you to anyone that's gone to thatpedalshowstore.com and grabbed some merch. It is the main way we fund the show.
It is. Patrons on Patreon, thank you so much for your support. Indeed. We greatly appreciate it. And if you click the description down, you'll see some links to retailers. If you use those links and you buy something, that also helps us out as well. So thank you to anyone who does that. Join us on Mondays, British time.
Oh, yes.
Most Mondays, British time at 5 p.m, where you can ask questions, and we could get into some of this.
Yeah.
If you have further questions, every amp being different, of course.
Amazing.
Cool.
Fabulous. Have a fantastic day. We'll see you.
I actually think you should play us out using both amps.
We can do that.
We will see you soon, but Dan's just going to play out because he was enjoying the boogie so much. It feels wrong to rob him of it. We may have to have a quick phase check, but... Can you hear it?
The AC-15 is so quiet. It's not making any difference.